Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Kim Hosen. I'm the Executive Director of Prince William Conservation Alliance. And this month we are celebrating 16 years in Prince William County. So we're a countywide organization, and we work towards protecting natural areas. We're engaged with the others who are putting forward a native plant effort. And we have a spot out in Merrimack Harbor. We have a demonstration garden that's used for education, and one in East Prince William on Mineral Road. We also do programs like this and pay attention to smart growth initiatives and opportunities. And here tonight, in many ways, we're going to talk about rural area incentives, why the rural area benefits us, and what were the benefits of redirecting some of our investments in the community over towards areas that have that are called transit hubs, where there's opportunities to increase public transportation and begin to get a grip on our traffic problem. So we kind of encompass the whole picture. Elena Schlossberg, who is our vice chair, has a few remarks to welcome everyone.
First I want to say welcome everyone, and also just recognize that this is, can you hear me?
Not over the mic.
Is this better?
You have to hold it really close.
Like, is this better? No.
No.
Hit the button for a second. There you go. There you go.
Oh.
Now you're good.
Okay. Oh!
The ONOFF switch.
So much better. So, my name is Elena Schlossberg. First, I'd like to say, I don't know if anybody here celebrates the Jewish New Year, but Lashana Tova. I can't think of a more important subject, to be perfectly honest, than protecting our environment and being here with the community. I'd also like to thank Giuseppe's, who always welcomes us into their home and their restaurant. They're a great community partner. So why are we here? We're here because we are debating the future of our county. And that future entails how the rural crescent is going to be preserved. And right now what we have before us is a plan that instead of preservation looks like more development. And so we've invited very specific speakers here tonight, because if you don't understand the language and you don't understand the definitions, you can't play the game. And it's really important to understand that right now what's happening is there are proposals that would develop very specific areas in the rural crescent. We have discussions about PDRs and TDRs and conservation easements. What we do know by the recommendations of the planning staff themselves is that the underlying principle, the only way this plan works is if you put infrastructure in the rural crescent, not only to support development in the rural crescent, but also in the development area. And so it's really important to know that one of our strategic goals in the comprehensive plan is smart growth. What is smart growth? Smart growth means that you put your infrastructure dollars where they get the most bang for their buck. For instance, we have just invested $12 million in Woodbridge to bury distribution lines. Why did we invest all that money, all of us, in the East End? Because smart growth means you redevelop areas where there is infrastructure, transit, activity centers. That's where you want your money to go. What's happening with this rural preservation plan, I would contend rural development plan, is that they are going to develop areas within the rural crescent and also develop in the development area. So now what we're doing is we're splitting the baby. So those precious infrastructure dollars that we need for roads and schools and transportation now get split between the entire county. Does that make sense? Is that smart growth? What draws me to the rural crescent is that it is not just a land use tool. It brings people together. Doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, race, religion, sexual orientation. We all support, in many ways, the principles of smart growth because it benefits everyone, not just a few. And what Prince William Conservation Alliance has been able to do is they are the glue that brings all the civic associations together. So I'm hoping that tonight we will be able to learn what a PDR program is, what conservation easements actually are. Within the plan, it's also predicated upon this idea that we're going to protect open space in cluster, in TDRs. But how do you protect open space? You can't just call it open space protection. How does that happen? So if the very mechanism by which we are supposed to be protecting open space isn't actually real, then I would contend that this plan is built on a false sense of security. So it's really important that we understand what the terminology is. And I just want to say once again that Kim Hosen has taken such a great leadership role in bringing the entire community together. Because the Rural Crescent isn't just about keeping your green space. It's about keeping your green and your tax dollars. So that's what we've been saying, keep your green. Keep your tax dollars, keep your green open space. Everybody benefits. This is not just about what impacts people who live in the Rural Crescent. This is about the entire county. And it is critical that we understand the terminology, how it's implemented. Because if we don't, what we're going to see is disappearing open spaces. Interesting, I was having a discussion with Mike Rolban, and we were talking about the incentives that haven't happened yet. Like all of a sudden we're moving to building housing in the Rural Crescent because something isn't working. I'm not sure what that is, that has yet to be defined. But we discussed, Mike, what are the incentives that the county has offered you in farming? Nothing. So I started thinking, well, what does that remind me of? You put in what you get out. I say to my kids, well, I failed my test. Did you study? What did you do to prepare? What did you put in order to get something back? What I would contend is we have not invested or incentivized protecting the Rural Crescent. And if we don't protect the Rural Crescent, then all of us end up paying. And on that note, I will turn it back over to Kim Hosen.
Okay, it's all good. So thank you. Yeah, and we need to also understand.
No, it's not good.
Not good.
Now
Better?
it is, yes.
Okay. We need to also understand what the incentive opportunities are. One of the things, and I just want to mention real quickly, that we did, it was an effort a few years ago, was to add more than 40 miles of scenic byways in Prince William County, which are all on the Crescent. And they are an opportunity. I mean, what the state is saying is we have a beautiful countryside, and it's beautiful enough to receive that recognition. So that we need to take advantage of. And before we go on, we have 3 planning commissioners here, is who I see. And I'd just like to introduce them: Don Taylor, Rick Berry, and Patty McKay. Thank you for being here. Our first speaker is Julie Bolthouse. Julie is a Fauquier County land use representative for the Piedmont Environmental Council. She grew up in Northern Virginia and attended Virginia Tech undergrad and grad program. She holds a remarkable number of interesting degrees. She has a BS in fisheries science, a minor in watershed management, a master's degree in urban and regional planning, and a master's degree in natural resources. So we are just thrilled to have her here with us today, and without ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Julie to talk about purchase of development rights.
All right, I'm going to make sure this works.
It's working on the laptop.
It does not work. It works on the laptop, but not up there, apparently. So I will have to hit the laptop here, so apologize if I'm not looking at you. I'm trying to keep track of what's going on with the slides in the presentation. So, oh my goodness, the volume on this thing is very weird. Glad this isn't karaoke. Okay. As she said, I'm Julie Bolthouse. I'm with Piedmont Environmental Council. and today I'm going to be speaking to you guys about purchase of development programs. So,
It's not moving. At all.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're good. All right, now we're cooking. All right, so I'm going to be talking to you about purchase of development programs. First, I want to talk about the loss of farmland that's happened in the United States. I'm sure all of you are aware. This is a map to 2000, and what it shows is 31 million acres of our farmland was developed between that time period. Nearly 11 million of that 31 million was our best farmland. The best farmland is categorized by resiliency, productivity, those sort of things. And as many of you know, development it disproportionately impacts agricultural land because the land that is very often productive is also the land that is most easily developed. So we are losing farmland at an alarming rate. And in Virginia, prior to 1960, we had about 25 million acres. Now, between 1982 and 2012, we lost 1.3 million acres. So what is the purpose of a PDR program? It's to stem this tide of agricultural loss. It's to protect our forest and farmlands, to provide for everybody in the county, not just the rural crescent, as Elena was saying. It also helps provide us with the opportunity to go to farmers markets, the aesthetic as we drive down our roads. I drive down 15 every day to go to work, and it's a beautiful drive, and part of that is because it goes through the rural crescent of Prince William County. The environment, our water quality, a lot of us are on well water, and the social benefits that it provides of hiking trails, other recreational activities. What are property rights? Okay, so first, before we start talking about purchasing them, let's make sure we understand what property rights are. So property rights are a bundle of sticks. You have multiple different types of property rights. You can take one stick out of that bundle and still have many other rights. So a couple examples of property rights that you have. You have the right to exclude others from your property. You have the right to control the use of your property as allowed by law, of course. Don't do anything illegal. Right to sell and lease and give away your property. And there's many other rights. One of those distinct rights that you have is the right to develop your property as allowed by the zoning that is currently on the property. With a PDR program, you are allowing the locality to purchase all or some portion of those development rights. This agreement is codified in a deed of easement. There's an example of a deed of easement from Fauquier County there. And very often that deed of easement includes a couple other things such as excluding activities such as industrial, commercial, and mining. So it generally is purchasing all of your development rights. However, that varies based on the easement that is written. It also may require certain practices. Some of the localities require riparian buffers, other things like that. It really just depends on the locality and what is put in that easement and what conservation values the locality is trying to preserve. There may be historic resources, there may be water resources, there may be other things. What is the value to the landowner? Well, the landowner gets, first of all, many farmers are what we call cash poor and land rich, which means that they have a great deal of equity tied up in their land, but they have to receive that equity, they have to cash it in, voluntarily sell their development rights for fair compensation. So they get the benefit of money up front that they can then use to either put into their business or use for whatever they may want to use it for. It also allows them to convert some of the wealth tied up in the land without relinquishing ownership or user, the ability to use the land for agricultural purpose. Although the proceeds of a PDR program are taxed, you see a tax reduction because the value of your land has gone down significantly when you put it in a PDR program. So there's several financial benefits for the landowner, and it's completely voluntary. The basic design of a PDR program is laid out here, there's two options. You can either do a flat rate or an appraisal. A flat rate is basically there's a value to each development right. An appraisal is you actually go and get your land appraised for the difference between the land before it's in easement, the different value before it's in easement, and the value of it after it's put in easement. And that difference is the value that the PDR program would give you for the property. Eligibility requirements. Some localities use different types of eligibility requirements. Size of your property could be an example of it. Proximity to a certain feature, such as a service or a growth area, something like that. They usually have a scoring criteria that allows them to rank. That scoring criteria looks at development potential, development pressure. It may look at water resources, historic resources, a variety of different things. And then, of course, funding. How much will it cost and who will pay for it are the big questions. So you hear funding and most people get really nervous. How in the world will we pay for this? Well, it's very interesting. There's actually a lot of support out there for land conservation funding. This is a database called Land Vote, and what it shows you is that, first of all, we have 29 states in the United States that have PDR programs, and we have 70 regions and localities that have adopted PDR programs. We see that in the last 10 years, out of all of the ballot measures and referendums that have gone forward within the entire country, 75.5% of those ballot measures and referendums actually passed. And those were measures that increased tax rate or increased fees on certain things. So these are taxpayers saying, yes, I am willing to give you additional money to take advantage of land conservation within my locality. There's 472 that were successful within just the ballot measures that were successful within the last 10 years. But I'm not going to lie to you. The hardest thing about a PDR program is funding. It is almost always the most contentious issue with a PDR program. So here are the PDR programs that are set up and established throughout the state. Only 5 of them are consistently funded, and I'm going to touch on 4 of them today, or 3 of them today. As you can see, many of them are established and funded periodically, but not regularly funded. Since the program's inception in 2007, the Office of Farmland Preservation has financially supported 16 PDR programs throughout the state and protected 13,917 acres through those programs. These are all the different state and federal tax incentives that you can leverage if you put in some local match. So if a locality is willing to do either a small tax increase or a fee on certain practices or appropriations at the end of the budget cycle or during the budget cycle towards a PDR program, you can leverage a variety of state funding sources. We have obviously the Office of Farmland Preservation, which I was just speaking about with the map. We have the Virginia Land Conservation Fund through DCR. You've got the ALE program, which can provide up to 50% match on easements. You have the REPI program, which is around military bases. And we actually have a representative who can talk to you more about that if you want to hear some details about that. And then we have the Virginia Land Preservation Tax Credit and the federal income deduction. And those are significant because not all of these programs completely pay you the full value of the land, so that you might do what they call a bargain sale, where you're getting you're getting paid through the PDR program an amount of money that is lower than the value of your actual property. So it's a bargain sale, so whatever the difference is between those two numbers, you can then get tax credit for or a tax deduction. And if you don't have enough income to take care of the tax credit, of course you can sell it on the market. Okay, so first I'm going to go into a couple different programs. Albemarle County has what they call the ACE program. They use an appraised value. They have a ranking system that's pretty complex, includes a lot of variety of different resources, not just agricultural, prime agricultural soils and things like that. They require stream buffers. They have a 10-person committee, it's a pretty large committee, to vote on which easements will be eligible and what their scores will be and all that. And then, of course, all of these programs, once the committee votes on them and ranks them, they go before the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors makes the ultimate call usually in most of these counties, actually in all of these counties that I'm going to be speaking about today. And they have no extinguishment or buyback or transfer options. Their program was established in 2000 and has preserved 9,621 acres, and they've extinguished 561 development rights. Clark County has 70, basically they have two different options. You can do an appraisal, and they'll only give you 75% of the appraisal, so that goes back to that bargain sale I mentioned earlier. And they also have a flat rate that's offered, and that flat rate ranges from $25,000 to $40,000, and that is dependent on a variety of different factors, but mainly it's the score of your land conservation value on your property and your income. So it takes in consideration if the landowner is lower income, they get a higher value for each development right. I forgot to mention Albemarle does that too. Several of these programs do take into consideration the landowner's income. This program was established in 2003 and has preserved 2,507 development acres and 111 development rights. So Fauquier County has a PDR program which just has a very simple flat rate. It ranges from $25,000 to $35,000, has worked very well. They require that any piece of land that goes into it is over 50 acres. And their applications are also scored and ranked, and then a committee of 5 review it and select which applications will move forward to the Board of Supervisors for approval. They have no extinguishment or buyback or transfer options. Now, real quickly, I did want to mention, this is Kenny Smith, who is a landowner in Fauquier County who has taken advantage of the PDR program. He runs a company called Moo Through. Many of you may have seen Moo Through on Route 29 or the ice cream trucks on Gilbert's Corner. He took the money from the PDR program, and he has said that that money that he got from the PDR program made the Moo Through business possible. That was capital he was able to invest in further adding value to his product, which was the dairy industry. And dairy, if you know anything about the dairy industry, they are struggling all over the country. So for him to be able to do that is wonderful. And he says that his business is going really well right now. And he's actually just purchased additional land that he also just put in the PDR program this year. So really great story there. Program was established in 2002, and they have 13,000 acres. Like I said, their program is very effective, and they've extinguished 660 development rights. Virginia Beach has a much more complicated program. They have an appraised value, but they have a payment system, a 25-year payment system, where they give you the interest on, basically it's a 25-year purchase agreement where you get the interest tax-free for that 25-year period, and at the end of the 25-year period, you get a principal lump sum. So it's not beneficial for people like Kenny Smith that I mentioned, because he doesn't get that money up front to reinvest into his business. And then the Agricultural Reserve Program also uses an extinguishment it has an extinguishment clause. So 25 years from the date of purchase, the landowner can request the city council to consider an application to repurchase the development rights. I'm going to get into that in a minute. We'll just see what the success of the program is. They actually have the oldest program in the state. They are the earliest program in the state, 1995. They have 9,700 acres preserved and 858 development rights extinguished. Now, here's the downside of their approach. First of all, that interest rate thing that I mentioned to you, well, that varies year to year. So right now the interest rate is extremely low. It's at 2. And in the past couple years it's been around 3. Prior to that it was up at 6. So when it was up at 6, people were really interested in this program because whatever you come in at, you are locked in for the 25-year period. So if it goes down to 2 and 3, landowners are like, I'm not interested. So right now they don't have very much participation. The other downside is that if, like I said with Kenny Smith, if you are a farmer and you want to invest in your business with these funds, you have to wait 25 years. So you have to basically ask your child, hey, are you interested in investing in the business in 25 years from now? I hope so, because this is what we're doing. And then the other problem is what happens when these come to term. And I had some long conversations with the Office of Virginia Farmland Preservation and with Virginia Beach, and they don't really know. It's an open-ended question what's going to happen. The first one comes to turn in 2022. And really, so Virginia Beach, weird thing, but they're exempt from the Open Space Land Act or something. And it's very complicated. I'm not going to go into the details because I don't even quite understand the details. But they have a little bit of leverage as to up to the point where they started accepting funds from the Farmland Preservation Act. So until 2010, easements start coming into play, which is 235. So until year 235, they might not have to worry about this. And in 2022, they may actually be able to do what they had said, allow repurchase of the development rights. But the problem is, if this goes before their city council, the political debates that are going to go on, this is going to be a complete and utter nightmare for the city council, because they're going to have to make the decision if these easements meet the things that were set forward. And the things that were set forward are very vague and very, very politically loaded. It's things like, can this property viably be kept in agriculture? Good luck, city council, figuring that out. Is this property, well, anyways, there's a lot of other things that they have to consider. So it becomes very politically charged. It's very loaded. Prince William County has, well, first let me just talk about typical concerns. Property rights funding to permanent, those are all the concerns that come into play. Possible responses to those, well, it's completely voluntary, so property rights aren't really being taken away. Funding, you can leverage federal, state, and private funds as match, and honestly, you could say you're leaving funding on the table by not having a PDR program. And they're too permanent, well, so is urbanization. We all know the bumper sticker. So, would it work in Prince William County? Well, it depends on community support for land conservation and funding of the program. And actually, I removed the last slide about Prince William's PDR program, but if anyone has some questions specifically about what Prince William County has proposed,
We're going to answer those. If anybody has some questions about that, we're going to do it at the end.
okay, do you want me to talk?
Take a note.
Do you want me to talk about what they've proposed, or do you want me to just leave it at
Let's leave it at
Okay,
that.
all right.
We're going to talk in the Q&A so that we can get on. And I would like to say welcome to Supervisor Janine Lawson. Thank you for joining us. Next, we're going to hear from Shelley Marstrand, who has a really great bio that I have to read. Shelley is a professor in practice of urban planning at Virginia Tech in Northern Virginia, where she teaches land use planning, natural resources planning, planning for parks, and practical studios. She's a planning consultant in the city of Falls Church and has consulted on planning issues, including scenic byways and heritage areas, with many nonprofit organizations and local governments. She has a PhD in geography from the University of Maryland and formerly directed the Rural Heritage Program at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And she's a co-author of Saving America's Countryside and Better Models for Development series with Ed McMahon. We are just delighted to have her here with us today. She's going to fill us in about what transfer of development rights are.
I can do that, Kim. Well, I think I figured out how. All right, so I do. Hit the arrow, what do you have to do? Now, click on this, and then that will make her pointer work. There you go. Now your pointer's working.
Okay. All right, this seems like a scary thing here. Can you hear me all right now? All right. If I'm not speaking loud enough, let me know. Just give a yell. All right, so this is sort of Transfer of Development Rights 101. I've been asked to just elucidate kind of what the program is, how it works, just kind of the ABCs of TDRs. So that is what I'm going to try to convey quickly. Accept.
Oh, it's not working. I'm sorry. Let me try again.
All right, so this is the American Planning Association's definition of TDRs, and I'm going to read through it just to belabor the point here. It's a voluntary, market-driven growth management tool that permits higher intensity development in designated receiving areas in exchange for land or resource protection in designated sending areas. So those first sort of adjectives are important. It's voluntary and it's market-driven. Here's basically how it works. There are sending parcels which have some sort of potential for conservation. They have some resource value. They're agricultural lands, they're forest lands, they have some valuable natural resources on them. Those are sending areas. The rights to develop on those lands, if they are not used, and if the owner wants to do so, those rights can be transferred to areas where development is more appropriate. Designated areas such as town clusters or areas near transit or transportation nexus. So that's basically how it works. It can also work, and it has worked successfully, in areas that are much more urban. You can take the rights from a building, say, that you want to protect and save, maybe a historic structure, and you can take the unused rights from that building and transfer those rights to an area that you might want to develop at a higher density. So this is sort of an illustration of how that's done. The unused rights on that historic building go to increase the height on a structure nearby. Now, some TDR programs permit a transfer only within one jurisdiction, but others can cross, say, city-county or county-county boundaries. Most programs typically operate within one jurisdiction. Some require the developers to buy the rights from the owners, the sending owners, but other programs create a bank. That is, the local jurisdiction actually manages a TDR bank, where that bank would actually buy rights, hold those rights, and then sell them to developers who want to acquire them. TDR works best in a strong real estate market. There really has to be an incentive to acquire those rights, and there has to be an incentive to protect land. And I think both of those are the case here in Prince William. It can be a very effective tool for protecting resources, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. There are also, though, some drawbacks or some weaknesses to a TDR program. Determining the boundaries of a sending and receiving area can be problematic. How do you decide exactly where the sending area boundaries are, and especially also how do you decide where the designated receiving areas are? Also, allocating rates of exchange can be challenging. Exactly what is a right worth? How much rights can come from a particular property? Just sort of setting that whole mechanism, the mechanical mechanisms of a TDR program up can be a challenge. And of course, finally, TDRs must have community support. Where it has worked most successfully is in Montgomery County, Maryland. Montgomery County started its program back in 1980, and it's really been the most successful across the entire U.S. Basically, what Montgomery County did was to down zone its agricultural reserve, or its rural crescent, if you will. It downzoned the area from 1 house per 5 acres to 1 house per 25 acres. But it compensated the landowners who were downzoned by, it paid them for the rights that it took. Its own bank, the county operated the bank, and developers in areas that the county had designated for higher density development, say along Route 29 near Silver Spring, near Bethesda, those areas of developers there could acquire rights from the bank and build to a higher density than the zoning allowed. So basically, the TDR program in Montgomery County has preserved 93,000 acres of land, and its agricultural reserve is pretty sacrosanct. It's been done through TDR, PDR, and through conservation easements, but the TDR program has been a critical element in that land conservation effort. Virginia enabled TDR programs back in 2006, and since then there have been several jurisdictions that have actually created such programs. The state has had to modify its legislation a couple of times to clarify things. Nobody kind of jumped in right away, but Arlington County did create a TDR program in 2009, Frederick County in 2010, and finally Stafford County in 2013. So to my knowledge, those are the only 3 counties in Virginia that actually have an operating TDR program. Arlington County has been probably the most successful of any of them, and you know, it's sort of ironic, you wouldn't think that Arlington, which doesn't have any rural land to speak of, yet it's used the TDR program very successfully. Basically, it's created sending areas where there's an incentive to protect open space, historic preservation, affordable housing, or community facilities. And receiving sites can be designated through the site planning process, through the special exception process. So, for example, if you were a developer in Ballston or Clarendon or Roslyn and you wanted to build higher than the zoning ordinance allowed you to do, you might be able to acquire rights from a designated sending area and build to a higher density. So successes have occurred, and just as I said, Clarendon, Ballston, and indeed Pentagon City. So for example, in Pentagon City, rights were transferred from the Long Branch Park, which is right near 14th Street Bridge, right near Crystal City. Rights were transferred from this park to a development right nearby in Pentagon City, and the payment of those rights allowed the park to fund an aquatic center. So it was a win-win for both. The park, which didn't have enough funding, was able to get a lot of money to build an aquatic center on the parkland, and the developer was able to build to a higher density in Pentagon City. In Clarendon, several historic buildings were protected. The rights from the buildings that they were never going to use were transferred to this particular development site in Clarendon, which was allowed to build to a higher density. Actually, there it's the name is Penzance. So there are other Virginia localities considering TDR programs right now. I can tell you, since I work in Falls Church part-time, it's very interested in creating a TDR program, primarily to protect its riparian areas that flood with great frequency. You know, it has only 2 little creeks in Falls Church, but when it rains heavily, they flood badly, and people's basements get flooded. And the city is interested in trying to slowly acquire some of those floodplain properties through TD, acquire the rights to those properties and transfer those rights to areas that they would like to have developed in the center of the city. Loudoun County has also been deliberating TDR programs. I think they've put them right now on hold. They've considered them off and on over the years. I think right now, maybe Julie knows more than I do, that Loudoun is kind of holding it at bay. Or, yes. Yeah. To be nice. So in Prince William, now, I am no expert in your TDR program. I've read the documents that have been prepared. I have some questions about them myself, but my understanding is that the sending areas are within the rural crescent, and there must be at least 20 acres on the parcel to be able to be a sending area. There are receiving sites that are both within sites A and B on your map, as well as in the designated built-up areas in Prince William, and then also I believe you can transfer rights to jurisdictions outside of the county. You're not creating a TDR bank, but rather there's a negotiation between buyer and seller so that a buyer, somebody who wants to build to a higher density, can come to somebody who's in a sending area and negotiate to acquire those rights. Now, the county may need some funding then to administer the program, but essentially the county isn't going to actually create the bank and do the acquisition of those rights. And if you have further questions about the TDR program in Prince William, I'm happy to try to answer them later. But now I'm going to turn the program back over to Kim.
Thank you very much.
And
Here, I'll take it.
okay, you take it.
We'll get this set up. And then our next speaker is Alan Rowsome, who is with the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. So we're a little straight here. And he is the executive director, where he manages a dynamic staff dedicated to saving nearby nature in the fast-growing DC suburbs. Before joining NVCT, Alan was the senior director of government relations for lands at the Wilderness Society and national chair of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition, and we're delighted to have him here today to help us better understand conservation easements and the opportunities through that tool.
Thanks. I'm needing your help if we can make this work. We're getting the presentation started here, but so yes, my name's Alan Rowsome. Our office is located in Annandale, so a little drive from here. But part of the reason that I'm here sorry for the technical. Not yet.
I don't know why.
You had the magic.
Yeah, now my mouse is going. Oh, there it is.
Is it going?
Maybe this is the one that won't work.
There it goes. I don't know why. It's just being weird.
Thank you. Okay, so again, I'm with the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. Our office is based in Annandale in Fairfax County. But we're doing more and more work in Prince William, in part because for those of us who live inside the Beltway, this has really become the battleground for land use throughout Northern Virginia. The development that we see was in Arlington at one point, it was in Fairfax at one point, and now it's here. And so this is the battleground where these issues are being fought out. And in many cases, those battles have been won or lost, mostly lost, throughout inner Northern Virginia. And what you see now is what many of you want to protect so that it doesn't become that. And that's why we're doing more work here than we ever have been before. So our organization is a regional nonprofit land trust. Julie's organization, I think, does some work in Prince William County as well, but we're one of the few, probably one of two, operating accredited land trusts in Prince William County working on conservation easements or landowners. We were founded in 1994. We have 8 staff, and we're really committed to conserving nature for the benefit of future generations. So what do? We work with private landowners and local governments to conserve and care for natural and historic treasures. And so over the past 25 years, we've protected through conservation easements 110 separate properties, and we now own 21 small nature preserves, equaling about 7,500 acres. We steward lands ranging in size from half an acre in Arlington, which can be a really important property to protect, to 400 acres out in this area, Stafford County, Loudoun County, Fauquier County. And we engage the community a lot with education. And that's something that as we build our capacity to work in Prince William County, we want to be able to do more of. We do a lot of that in Fairfax, in Stafford, in Arlington and Alexandria, and it helps people understand not only what their options are, but to build more pride in place and to build more pride in protecting the natural areas that they live in. And we also spend a fair amount of time advocating for appropriate land use, both in Richmond, but also in county government throughout Northern Virginia. So how do we help the community conserve land forever? I think everyone's heard of conservation easements. Probably many of you do know what they are, but we'll go through that and we can certainly answer any questions you may have. It is a legally binding, flexible tool to conserve land that has features. I know that there is a lot of conversation in Prince William County about whether it is in fact legally binding. Really, and we work with a lot of counties where this is the case, your property is held under conservation easement and is legally binding when it's held by a third-party conservation organization like ours. And Prince William is not the only county in which there are discussions about county-held easements not being kept as open space or conservation. The probably only way to ensure that that would be the case is by using a third-party conservation organization like ours. Yep. Landowners protect land protected remains in private ownership and can be sold or passed on to heirs. So we can go over a little bit of what are the myths and misnomers of conservation easements. Once you put a conservation easement on a property, that easement rides with the deed of your land. That property can be sold, and at any point later on. It will be sold at whatever value that property has with the easement on it. And in the end, what an easement does is it extinguishes development rights that you may have on the property. It means that that property will remain how it is today, except that easements are very flexible tools. You might have multiple dividable rights on your property and you want to give up 2 but keep 1. You might want to give up 10 and keep 3. Depending on how many you want to keep up, the tax benefits you may reap from such a property will change, but you have a lot of flexibility to do different kinds of land use. Maybe you own a farm and you want to have the opportunity to put a barn on that farm in 10 years. So you could do a conservation easement with us where you are holding out a dividable right for that barn but protecting the rest of the property. And though that isn't necessarily the property is conserved for all time as it is more than likely then conserved in its perpetuity for as much as that landowner is willing or able to do, and that is very meaningful. Federal and state tax law provide benefits to most landowners to conserve property. What I try to drill into people's heads about this is that Virginia has some of the best tax credit programs and land incentive conservation in all of the country. Many states would really, really kill to have what Virginia has. A land preservation tax credit program that allows you, both in your state and federal taxes, to reap significant benefits from doing land conservation. And as a result of that, Virginia has conserved almost 1 million acres of land using a land preservation tax credit program throughout the state that would not have happened without that. So what I'm always telling landowners is, oh, I'm going to lose money, this is going to be a tough deal for me. Well, the reality is in Virginia, you're going to do very well by almost any other state in the country, and that's a tool that I think most people take for granted and don't often realize is that it's available. Easements can be amended but not rescinded. We do amend easements from time to time, and it does allow for some flexibility. It's not often optimal because most of the time when somebody wants to amend an easement, it's not to protect that place further. It's usually because they now have a different situation and want to move it, but it is a possibility. However, they cannot be rescinded, at least if you've done one with an organization like ours. So a conservation easement is a legal agreement between a landowner and a qualified conservation organization that permanently limits certain uses of the land to protect its conservation value. The potential financial benefits to the landowner, we talked about this. We are considered a charitable donation, and if you do an easement with us, you are making a charitable donation. Landowners may be eligible, and I know this is hard to read, for everything from federal income tax deductions to Virginia income tax credits, federal estate tax exclusions, and possible local real estate tax reduction. I also often get lots of questions, well, what if I don't need, what if I don't need a big tax credit? Well, you can sell your credits on an open market and get 80 to 90% of their value in cash.
I need to get a phone charger. Can you keep
don't have a problem with their taxes, we can work with you through a broker or otherwise to sell those credits. And so whenever anybody says, well, I don't have a problem with my taxes, I don't need that money, well, we can still put cash in your pocket. And that is very meaningful to people who want to hold on to the land that they have. Overall benefits of conservation to the landowner: it permanently protects the land you love. Most of the people that we find who want to do conservation want to know that that place is going to look like it does today, no matter who owns it down the road, that it's their legacy that they're passing on. It may if you put your land in conservation. This is when we work with local farms. Often, when we talk to farmers, sometimes this is their last resort in order to keep a farm running. Retains the right to own and operate your property. If you do a conservation easement on a property, you have not lost the right to own and operate your property. And you can do many things on it. You can timber a property, you can certainly farm a property, you can do many other business-related operations on a property. You can also extract some of the land's cash value now without having to sell. So you want to own the property, you need money, and you don't want to sell it. The conservation easement really allows you to extract some of that value out of the property, and you get to hold on to it. And that's a very beneficial thing to many people who, in a lot of cases that we see, are land rich and cash poor when it comes to their future. It also maintains the ability to sell the property later, obviously subject to restrictions and easements. We work often with second and third generation landowners who are buying a property that they didn't put the easement on it, but now that property is still restricted. It's our job as an accredited land trust to make sure that that covenant that you as the original owner signed is then held through to the next landowner and beyond. This is also can be very helpful in estate planning. What we find is families, elderly landowners who don't want to leave a property to multiple family members to figure out how to divide up themselves. They're worried about what it's going to mean for their heirs. Conservation easements save you from that, and in many cases ensure that the property is there and give peace of mind to an elderly landowner that they're not leaving a problem for their heirs who may not even live here anymore or who otherwise would probably fight over the proceeds. And then finally, an ability to take direct action that can benefit the entire community. There's not a lot of public land out there to go gobble up for new parks. Most of it's private. The opportunity that people have in a private way to benefit communities is a big deal. What we find more often than not is people want to protect that quality of their neighborhood. And certainly further in Fairfax County and Arlington and Alexandria, that could be about one tree. You could have an entire community wanting to do conservation over one tree, because that tree defines a whole neighborhood for many people. Out here, that's probably a little bit different, but change that mindset a little bit, and it's not so dissimilar. One property, one open space may define what you know as your neighborhood or your drive or why you love to live here, and you may not own that property, but you may really want to make sure that it doesn't change. And that's where we need to know more about, what conservation options we can provide to that person, whether that property is yours or somebody else's that we might be working with. This is a conservation easement that we protected throughout Northern Virginia in the last 25 years, 110 or so. We also get a fair amount of donations of land, because if you don't want to do a conservation easement, you can donate land, and that is also a charitable deduction. And so for some people who aren't interested in doing the conservation easement, you could donate land to become a nature preserve, and then we'll manage it. We'll own it. We will not sell it. And so each of these dots, and you'll see, most of the dots that head out towards Prince William, Loudoun, Fauquier, Stafford have all shown up in the last 5 to 7 years, because our organization has started fanning out to where more of the opportunities lie. And you're going to see more and more of us in Prince William County because there's tremendous opportunity here. We're still working in Arlington and Alexandria, but it's a different ballgame, in part because of property values and in part because of density. And so the opportunity for us is here. Now, this is an even harder map to see, but this is Prince William County. And each one of these blue dots here are conservation easements that we hold. We hold 13 easements, about 1,044 total acres in the county. I suspect that number will double in the next 2 years, no matter what happens, but maybe much more than that. We actually have, because I know this is a hot button issue, we hold 3 conservation easements on county parks, and at the time that park was created, they were eased. And so those parks now have a covenant on them that we manage that nobody can mess with. James Long Park, Locust Shade, a small piece of Prince William Forest Park, and then we actually have an easement at Forest Greens Golf Course. And what that means is we go out and manage those properties each year along with the county to ensure they're keeping up with their end of the bargain and nothing further problematic can happen there. And any sort of activity that they want to undertake on those parks, they have to run through us first. The largest property that we protected is 380 acres, Leopold's Preserve and Haymarket, but the smallest in Prince William County is 5 acres. And so that's another, I think, key point takeaway is a lot of people think, I don't own enough to make a difference, I don't own enough to do a conservation easement. The reality is if you have any dividable rights on your property of any size, it could well be very valuable to you. And we will talk to any landowner about a property of any size. Most of the time, smaller properties we're looking at are properties that buffer current parks, but we'll look at anything that helps build into a community where maybe one person taking a jump and doing a conservation easement allows us to talk to 3 or 4 more people, and before you know it, an entire community is doing something good that benefits everyone. So, a few final pictures of some of the properties that we hold in Prince William County. A lot of these, you know, should look familiar, and they probably are, and many of them you probably drive by every day, and maybe it's taken for granted, but those properties will always be there, and as development hopefully doesn't, but if it does come up around it, that property will remain as it always has been, and we need to find more and more examples of that. Forest Greens Golf Club in Triangle, we saw a property in Nokesville, and then Leopold's Preserve in Haymarket. So I'll leave you with that. I have a number of pieces of propaganda if anybody wants to grab them on their way out. But really our goal is to spread the word, and I think both of the speakers who came before you were eloquent and did a great job. Until Prince William has a TDR or PDR program that's working, this is probably the best option that landowners have. If Prince William does end up with a PDR and TDR program, they're very complementary to conservation easement work. We, as a accredited land trust, would be advising landowners of their opportunities to use a PDR, a TDR, or an easement program. Some people don't want to work with government. And if you didn't want to work with government, you might not want to do a TDR or PDR program. You might want to work with a third-party land trust. The flip side may also be the case. You don't want to work with a third-party land trust or a green organization. You would rather work for a county. The fact that you would have those options in front of you only encourages more conservation. And we can talk about, you know, how much money or how it comes to you, the difference between PDR, TDR, and easements, but they all are lucrative to people in their own ways if you've got property with dividable rights. So I'll leave it at that, and I think we're going to head to Q&A, but, you know, happy to talk further about any of this that needs detail.
Thank you, Alan. And one thing I would just like to add on, Alan is correct that usually land owned by government is resistant to putting that into a conservation easement, and it's usually considered protected. But we do have an example in Prince William County of Merrimack Farm Wildlife Management Area, which is the first wildlife management area in Northern Virginia, and it is in a permanent conservation easement held by the U.S. Marine Corps. So we know that's going to be there too. Now we're down into our community conversation and question and answer segment. Does anyone have a comment or a question? Oh, and we would want all the speakers to come up, please.
I
want you all to know she was my professor when I was getting my master's in urban affairs and planning, so I'm handing the professor the mic.
She was,
You get a C?
and she was one of my prize students.
Oh.
There you go.
So oh, this is such a quiet crowd. It's never happened before.
Can a
Whoa.
sorry about that. This is for Alan. Can a floodplain area on a property become a protected area under this program?
Absolutely. A significant amount of the conservation we do ends up being either in RPA or in floodplain, and if there are dividable rights on that property, a floodplain would actually be potentially more valuable as a conservation easement to us ecologically.
Thank you.
Aaron's got a question up here.
I have a bunch of questions. So why is government's easement not as good as third party? Please explain.
I mean, the long and the short of it is it shouldn't. But the reality is, and we see we're fighting it out in Fairfax County all the time too, for the most part, local government has land and easement until they decide that they want to do something different with that property.
So you're saying it's not legally binding?
It is legally binding, but you've got to go and prove that in court. And the counties believe, for the most part, that you won't put that fight up. And to be fair, it is probably a toss-up, depending on where you ended up fighting it out, whether it would be worth the resources to fight a county on whether a property's easement should be upheld. A lot of county ordinances, and I haven't dug deep into Prince William's, if you look back on them, do say that though that property is now preserved in conservation, that there are little loopholes throughout that would allow, that these days you could potentially drive a truck through, that if my organization were working on it, my legal team might say, not a fight worth fighting, even though we probably on its merit shouldn't want this to happen. Expending those resources is a tough decision for somebody to make. And so you don't want easements to have little value, but counties have a lot of pressures on them. And a lot of times when you look back, the reason they put those properties in easement before was not necessarily because they would be apart forever. It's because they did have potentially other designs on them. And that can make people very unhappy because they've now known that place to be that park or that open space for 20, 30, 40 years. And for good reason, but mounting a legal challenge against a county, to do that could be won, but it's high stakes.
So they lie.
The thing is whoever put it under easement, that however many generations ago, may well not have lied. They may have well thought, that's exactly what I want it to be, and I'll go to my grave if that's what I want it to be, but they're not here making the decisions now.
Well, then why is your easement not
Well,
prone to the same thing?
because we're held to an accreditation standard and a national land trust standard that has what we do about protecting it as open space. We don't have a pressure on us to build a school on that site. We don't have the pressure on us to build a hotel on that site. We don't have a pressure on us to develop it. Our business model and the reputation we build in the community would be hurt badly if we took an easement and said it's not going to be protected anymore. In fact, probably people wouldn't work with us anymore. So reputationally, but also because the standards by which we have to manage our organization demand it, those easements are airtight.
Okay. And
Go ahead, is that the same question?
no, it's a different question.
Oh, can I get somebody else and come back to you?
Sure.
Or is it connected?
Yes.
The Open Space Land Act does require.
True.
Yeah, so
Yes, it does.
I just want to clarify, the Open Space Land Act does require that an easement is held into perpetuity. However, there's abilities to transfer easements, and a lot of times that's what localities will use. So they don't just build on an eased piece of property and then that's it. What they'll do is they'll identify another parcel, and then they'll say, well, this is the parcel we're going to protect now, and we're going to build a school site here.
Okay. And the Open Space Land Act mentions that only 20 acres and above can be, is considered open space. Is that, the concern I have is you said that you can do conservation easements on as small as half an acre, so you're not constrained by that open space land
No,
act?
we're not beholden to that, and that, you know, localities maybe, but a conservation land trust like ours is not. And Virginia will still provide generous tax benefits if you've got an acre of land, but you're zoned for 4 homes on that acre of land, which we see a lot in Arlington and Fairfax. If you've only built 1 home on that land and you decide you won't build on the other 3, your tax benefits back are astronomically high.
And the Open Space Land Act doesn't have that 20-acre minimum. I think we're confusing zoning with Open Space
Okay,
Land
you're
Act.
thinking about
Right,
the Prince
exactly.
William
That's
County
right.
program, I
That's
think.
Yes.
The 20
and-
acres.
Yes.
And if you do on smaller easements, which have to be enforced and maintained, just as larger easements.
Yeah, I mean,
So
the work it takes to protect a 3-acre conservation easement is actually the same, at least in the paperwork side, as a 400-acre site, though the monitoring of it is much different.
So that really the 3-acre site or the 2-acre site would have to have significant conservation value.
Right, right. And let me be clear about the importance of that. We have 2 full-time staff who spend their entire year going out walking the boundaries of conservation easements. Because if you're dumping on that property, if you're mowing somewhere you shouldn't, very small violations get caught, and then we hold those people accountable. You know, unlike some counties, and I don't know actually how Prince William does it, but some county easements are not well, you know, followed in terms of what's the boundary line, you know, where can people do this or that, or there's already, you know, trespass going on in that site. That wouldn't happen in our case because we're monitoring it to such an extent that we're going to catch something happening very quickly.
Hi, I'm Linda Silverstream. I'm thinking of a particular scenario. You have a landowner that puts it in this easement, you now controlling the property. What if VDOT comes along and says, by eminent domain, I'm taking this to the White County Parkway?
Yeah, I mean, as you do conservation easements, I mean, obviously there are, you know, Dominion's got utility easements over many properties. You know, we're not going to beat VDOT in most cases. I will say, though, that because of the relationship that we have with VDOT and the relationship that we have with Dominion, we're often able to divert routes, at least in part, to try to minimize the impact that it would have on a particular conservation easement. You don't always win, and certainly with entities like that, you know, that is a risk that you potentially run. But when you have a credible land conservation organization like PEC, like ours, you know, you have a tool at your disposal to fight the location of the siting of that road or that utility easement to try to minimize the damage. It doesn't always work, but most of us have pretty good relationships with them to where we can improve the situation.
And let me add one more thing, sorry. And the one other thing I would add is very often easements are held in partnership with multiple organizations, and if you have the Department of Historic Resources or if federal funding or state funding is put into the project, so American Battlefield, ABPP, whatever the PP stands for, but anyways, if those funds,
Program.
thank you, American Battlefield Protection Program, if those funds are put towards a project, then they have to go through a different level of scrutiny, and very often that will stop your linear infrastructure projects, and they will reroute around it because there's different rules.
Good evening. My name's Don Taylor. First I want to pass on a thank you to Kim, Elena, Karen on getting us all together here this evening. My cover was already blown. I'm on the Planning Commission. And I'm here along with Commissioner McKay, Commissioner Berry. We're trying to get our organization baseline as we move forward with all these rather significant potential solutions to our rural crescent. I have a question on TDR. So I have some familiarity with Montgomery County. I know that's a very successful TDR program, but I also know it takes a rather large group of people to administer it from a county vantage point. And I have some involvement with Loudon. I know they struggle with pricing, as you mentioned on your chart, pricing with TDRs. And what we currently have in our package here that we are looking at within Prince William County, looks like it's pretty sophisticated. So from your vantage point, is there an entry-level TDR program that would help us preclude some of the shortfalls I just mentioned, overly staffing, or trying to figure out a way to price? Thank you.
I don't know. There's not one in Virginia. Is this on? Can you hear me now? Okay. There's not one in Virginia upon which you can model a TDR program. That's for sure. Again, the Arlington County, maybe talking to the people in Arlington County would be of benefit, simply because they've had such success, even though they're not trying to protect rural land. Again, they don't have a bank, just as you all are not planning to have. It seems, at least according to the document that I've read, it seems like the price of the exchange of funds is up to the buyer and seller, right? So that's a sort of negotiation between two parties there. The county doesn't have anything to say about that, right? I have to confess that I'm a little confused by some of the language in the document that's been prepared about the TDRs. I've read it several times, and there are still places where I get stuck because I don't exactly know what some of those charts mean about what can get transferred and what remains to be developed and so forth. So I guess I'd like some more clarity on that. But I think Arlington is probably your most likely partner to talk to.
Thank you very much for that. If you're confused with what we have, you really made me feel better. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Randy Freak with PWCA. One of the problems that we have environmentally these days is habitat fragmentation. And that problem is going to be exacerbated by climate change, where we really need to have wildlife corridors that will allow plants and animals to migrate. So, a question. First, in the existing programs that are in Virginia counties right now, is there any sort of strategic approach that emphasizes TDRs and PDRs in such a way that promotes connectivity? And also for you, sir, does your Northern Virginia Conservation Trust have such a strategic approach that you put a premium on trying to promote connectivity? Thank you.
Well, what I would say is every locality has a comprehensive plan, and easements have to be, they're required to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And using all of those different tools, TDRs, PDRs, and easements, you can try to create those green corridors that you're talking about if they're in the comp plan. If there is some guiding document saying these are key areas we want to protect. So for example, with the PDR program, I said there's a scoring criteria. You could put in there that if the site is consistent with the green emerald plan for stream corridor connections, this will get 5 extra points. And that would be one way of strategically trying to locate your easements. And it's not just PDRs, it's those voluntary easements he's talking about. It's potentially a TDR program if you set one up. And then of course your parks too, your county parks are also a piece of that. So yes.
Is anybody already doing that?
Oh, absolutely. There's several places. Albemarle County has a green plan, so does Loudoun County. I think Prince William actually has something in their comp plan about it. It would just be a matter of actually referencing it and using it.
So let me add to that. We have better GIS mapping and layers than ever before. We absolutely know where we should be protecting, and most land trusts like ours have moved now from waiting for the phone to ring because somebody wants to conserve your property to knowing that your property is really important and coming and finding you and saying, this is really important, what can we do to get you there? And so we're starting to do more of that, and we can do it, and we will be doing it in Prince William County. On a statewide level, arguably the biggest push that Governor Northam is making in his 4 years is to pull all of these layers of data together, including Nature Conservancy and lots of data that that the state keeps, to create what they are calling Conserve Virginia. And if you haven't heard about it, it's basically a statewide map that through 20 some odd GIS layers is now telling us where we ought to be working. And the Northam administration is saying that if you meet criteria that are on that map to be high priority, you will have more likelihood of state funding for projects. If you need to acquire a property versus do an easement, buy it in fee, the state has a land acquisition fund that you can use. And so we do now have a tool, even outside of our own prioritization, that the state is coming up with that they're going to then direct money to based on, well, that's a valuable property for habitat or for stream restoration or for clean water. And so we have a lot of layers we can work in, and I do think that where we're headed and we're working, and we're already starting to get grants to do more of it, is starting to look at each of your communities, in terms of what above all else needs to be protected. And rather than waiting for you to come find us someday, we're going to come and find you.
I actually have a question too, if I can sneak them in. One, Julie, you just mentioned about open space corridors. So I'm wondering if you can comment on the staff recommendations that recommendations in the Rural Preservation Plan actually have infrastructure like schools and fire and rescue and everything that needs to support the rural crescent in these open space corridors. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that. And then I have a question for you, Shelley. When you saw the recommendations that had sending and receiving areas within the rural crescent, can you tell me, like, have you seen that before? Or because what I saw on your presentation was that generally you have areas you're trying to protect going into areas that you have infrastructure, transit, activity centers, and everything where none of that exists in the rural crescent.
Well, no, I have to say I was rather, I don't know, this thing is working half time and not half time. It's working. All right. I have to say that personally I was rather shocked to see the yellow areas in the rural crescent that are designated as receiving areas.
Yeah.
Again, I live in Fairfax County, not Prince William, and so I don't know your county as well as I perhaps should, but those areas make no sense to me geographically. Especially the one that's out there to the west. Why were those areas chosen as receiving areas? There's no rationale, certainly in the document. There's nothing that explains why in the world you would decide to put these three blocks of land in the receiving area, in the sending area as receiving zones. They don't make sense to me. But again, maybe you all are more familiar with the area, maybe you know why those designations were made. I've never seen anything quite like that. So, I don't know, question in the back?
Oh, did you want me to answer?
Yes, and then I would like you to address the putting infrastructure in what is now appeared to be for the first time ever identifiable open space corridors.
Okay, yeah. So we have the same issue. I actually live in Loudoun County, and we have the same issue with our open space. They have not succeeded, but they're trying to do the same thing of allowing our infrastructure in our open space. And it is extremely problematic because this area is supposed to be used, as we said, for open space. And it kind of goes towards what you were speaking about before, about the county just kind of encroaching on what they promised to do and not really being committed to it. And I think that's exactly what it is. Can I just say one other thing before I forget to say it, because I feel like it's really important, and I'm sorry I didn't say it during my presentation. If you, in the PDR program as planned with Prince William County, if you have this 25-year transfer option, you're also potentially not eligible for all of those funding sources I had on that list. The only one you're potentially still eligible for, and we're not completely certain, is the Office of Farmland Preservation. I had a conversation with their office, and we're not completely certain. You might still be eligible for that one. But the DCR funding, the ALE funding, the REPI funding, because I mean, they're not going to want you transferring your land. It has to, the parcel that they have committed to protecting has to be the parcel that stays protected in perpetuity. They can't have it being moved somewhere else. So I just want to be really clear, you're leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't, if you go that route with that 25-year transfer.
So somebody way in the
Wait,
back.
I had somebody
Just be holding a microphone.
My name's Jan Boyle, and I just have a quick question. If a landowner would certify their part of their property in order to conserve it, certify part of it with the National Wildlife Federation as a wildlife habitat and bird sanctuary, would that preclude them from entering into a trust, a conservation trust?
Absolutely not. That'd be great.
Kim? Gentleman in the back.
Yeah, I'm going back.
I'm Martha Henley from Anderson District in rural Crescent. Fortunately, living on 25 acres, loving every bit of it. I have struggled and struggled since the last planning staff presentation to understand their plan. And I have finally come to the conclusion it's no different than the one in June. It still puts development in the rural Crescent instead of outside of it. It still brings in sewer and, worse yet, other infrastructure. There wasn't something they called the transition ribbon. They don't call it the transition ribbon anymore. They've got little clusters in other areas that are favored. I am just trying to understand how it's any different, and I'd like somebody to explain that to me, please.
I'm pretty sure, I think that was a rhetorical question. I don't think anybody can explain that.
I'm not going to take what I think. I just want to be clear. I didn't start this particular conversation. Professor, I love what you said. I've looked at the study, I've looked at state code, and it makes no sense to me. But I'd take it a step further. Because it's not just the yellow blobs on the map, it's the green blobs on the map. I would like your take on the efficacy, or perhaps even the legality, of designating a sending area in the rural Crescent and having it transfer not only to receiving areas both within and without the rural area, but also new zoning categories within the rural area where you would be providing density bonuses in something that is not designated as a quote-unquote receiving area, which I believe is how it's statutorily defined. So how do you have a receiving area, the development area that meets the statutory requirements of the code, receiving areas in the rural area that don't necessarily meet those, and then the creation of a new zoning designation, rural conservation residential, where you're going to achieve density bonuses based potentially on a TDR program. And I'm just curious what your thought on the efficacy and propriety of that is.
I wouldn't even use the word efficacy at all. I wouldn't use the word efficacy. I was also rather surprised at that new designation, which allows sewer. So even though there's a 60% of the land, I guess, is supposed to be conserved, but nevertheless, you're bringing in sewer, and that, to me, is just right away, just fire alarms went off. So the propriety of it, I think is dubious.
Can you explain why the sewer was fire alarms? Explain why that's fire alarm.
the sewer, it's like the first inroad. It's like saying, okay, put in sewer, then what is it? They're all going to be on wells. I mean, the next step is water. The next step is more roads. I mean, it's just the first intrusion into the rural area. And you know, I've lived in Northern Virginia most of my life, and I used to come out to Prince William County, and the Haymarket area was pristine. I mean, I remember it when it was pristine. And anymore, it is not. And Route 15 is just turning from, I mean, one subdivision after another after another. It took me nearly an hour and a half to get here from Reston. You know, it just, I don't know. I'm a little mistrustful of the line being held, shall we say.
I just want to add one thing to that. It adds capacity, and what developers are looking for when they're looking for a site is what capacity do I have? Their capacity for sewer, capacity for water, capacity for transportation. That's why when you build roads oversized, you're providing excess capacity, you're inviting growth. And that's why we don't like things like the Bi-County Parkway. You know, so all of these different things had capacity.
Kim, can I take a second dip? I just think back to the time in 1998 when the Rural Crescent was adopted in our comprehensive plan. And I remember time and again, the then county attorney Sharon and telling the board supervisor many times that the only control that the state gives them is control of the sewer. And I think that's a good thing to remember today.
Yeah, got a smooth sewer.
My name is Munir Beg. I'm actually the candidate for the chairman as an independent as well in the county. The question I'm trying to understand for myself is the whole thing is based on voluntary, PDR or TDR. The landowner on a voluntary basis put the stuff in the program. Now if a landowner does not choose that option, a developer comes and offers them 10-acre lots by right, they can build right now without doing anything. Developer opts a better option and they go into this 10-acre lots option. What are the consequences that we can face down the road? Because if that whole, we have 15,000 acres that we have already lost, 1,500 homes. We have 25,000 acres or somewhere around that left. That's another 2,300 homes that can possibly come there just by right. If we do not do anything and let it go as is, which is some of the supervisors and stuff like that, we're protecting it, we're protecting it, we're protecting it. Yet anybody has to give a solid plan how we are protecting it, because it's slipping away little by little out of our hands, and we're going to be sitting here saying we're protecting it, we're going to look back, well, it's gone now. What are you going to protect it? So what is the incentive that we can provide to the landowners that will actually encourage them to put it in the PDR and TDR rather than giving it to the land developers?
Well, one thing I'd suggest is not extending sewer past the line. Because, I mean, that right there makes it more difficult for them to get the kind of densities that make them want to develop out there. The other thing that I mean, basically, any incentives like the PDR program and the TDR program, those are options for a landowner. So instead of being stuck with the option of, well, I can just keep on farming as is and do nothing, or I can develop, there's at least a middle ground. And they can go, oh, well, maybe I'll do this PDR program, or maybe I'll do this TDR program. So at least it puts another option on the table.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would only put it a slightly different way, which is that, you know, developers are always going to be able to offer more money than a state program, a PDR, or a TDR, and so you have to disincentivize the developers from talking to a landowner to give them that deal. Because I don't know that there is a situation that I can dream up where the pockets that developers have to throw at a landowner are combated by resources I have, resources that the state or whatever has that can combat that. And maybe somebody else in the crowd has an answer and they want to take the microphone, but to me you have to disincentivize those developers from seeing a value in going to that landowner, because it's not going to be profitable. And so that gets back to sewer, that gets back to the infrastructure. you also, you know, there are people on the planning commission here, there are people on the board here, you know, developers are smart, they lobby the heck out of people, and so you also have to have, you know, people in those positions that, you know, want to do the right thing because they will be pushed.
So one of the questions that when you say don't allow sewer, I live in a neighborhood where there's no sewer, it's no anything water. I live on well and septic, and there's a lot of neighborhoods like that where there are well and septic. The way I am looking at it is kind of because I've been thinking about it quite a bit, because when I look at it, 25,000 acres developed, 2,500 homes potentially coming in there. On an average, 3.5 kids per home. That's almost 7,500 to 10,000 kids. On an average, 3 to 4 cars per household. That's another 10,000 cars. Stormwater management problem. All these other problems are going to come in by right. Thing is that we need to start thinking really as a county as a whole and get behind this so that we can manage it today, because it's going to get developed regardless. If you're not going to do anything about it. If we're going to just say we're going to protect it, it's going to get developed. And we will have 10,000 kids to then handle because school provides schools for them. We'll have 20,000, 15,000, 10,000 cars to handle with no roads, and we'll have water running all over because trees will be gone. We'll have a lot bigger problem out of our hand that we might not be able to handle.
So what I would respond to with that is, honestly, how long, Kim, has Prince William County had the current zoning that they have in the rural crest, the 10 acre?
1990. Oh, well,
yeah,
even longer than that.
Yeah, decades. So this is not, you're not going to, obviously we've had it for this long, it hasn't all developed right now. So the way development works is they're going, like I said, for capacity. You build excess capacity on Route 15, you start building excess roads out in those areas, then you're going to start to see them come. If you don't build that capacity, they're not going to come out there. There is no profit in it for them. The other thing is, in terms of sewer and water, developers, when they're working out in rural areas, they have to find soils that perk. You're not going to be able to find every single site. Basically, you're not going to be able to maximize your density, is what I'm saying. You're going to get a lot less than that number that you're using. So that's where I would say.
Let me just add one thing. Well, you know, if you want to look at one of your neighbors, Loudoun County, if Prince William County were really aggressive, you could downzone some of that area. Loudoun County downzone from 1 house per 3 acres to 1 house per 25 or 50 acres.
And it made a big difference.
Can you imagine? And it was upheld by the Virginia Supreme Court.
Yeah.
With no compensation.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could educate some of us who are relative newcomers to Prince William County about the situation in 1998 as to how the boundaries for the rural crescent were determined.
That's a Kim question.
That's all.
Yeah, there's several people here who can answer that. And they were, maybe Martha would be actually the best person to answer that, but they were looked at very carefully and some properties were cut out. So.
In 1998, when they drew the boundary between the rural area and development.
Speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Planning staff looked at everything that was currently zoned agricultural. And the standard for agricultural was 1 unit per 10 acres. They looked at what was already agricultural and they drew the boundary along that line. Now, it included some areas that had already been subdivided into either 5 acre or 1 acre lots. And that stayed in rural area because they were zoned A1. They were still zoned agricultural. So that's, they took all the contiguous parcels.
And some parcels that maybe should have been, were cut out, like Bristow Station. Bristow Station, which was cut out of the rural area,
and probably should have been in. So,
You want to know about Dominion Valley?
and Dominion Valley. So these are all conversations for afterwards with a drink.
I just have two real quick questions regarding PDR. Some of these programs in some of these Virginia counties do not have extinguishment in their PDR program. Is removing an extinguishment clause a decision that is just made by the locality?
So the only locality I was able to identify that even had an extinguishment clause was Virginia Beach. I think Chesapeake might too, because they modeled theirs off of Virginia Beach. So it is not typical to have an extinguishment clause in there.
And that's just a choice the locality makes?
So every locality drafts an ordinance to adopt a PDR, and yes, it's in that ordinance.
Okay, so ours could have that removed easily?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Other very quick question regarding land trusts. REPI is one of the groups that has been mentioned that would be used by our planning office for funding. Why would REPI down in Quantico fund conservation in Haymarket?
Well, they wouldn't.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't. First.
Yeah. I was actually, do you want to say a couple words, Farrell? Or I can just go over your choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tim can answer it, but essentially what we're going to do, we look at Quantico, we look at things that impact our base. How you doing, Joe? We're bringing for base Quantico. So I'm trying to answer your question.
Can't hear you.
Hear me now? Yeah. We look at things that impact our base and our fence line. So that's the bottom line.
She doesn't know what she's talking about.
So Quantico would be willing to partner for purchase of development rights or for an actual conservation purpose
In that area.
in their area of interest, in areas that they feel they've identified that protect their ability to complete their military mission.
And they've got a map. I mean, I know you're not going to show it.
No,
but,
they have a map in the top plan.
but we know where they want to be doing land acquisition, and there's a lot of resources to bring to bear. But I think the long and the short of it is, no, that map does not extend to Haymarket.
Yes, and it was this source of half of the funding that was used to purchase Marinite Farm.
Yes.
So there was somebody else. No, we just look at oh, we can't just be stopping here, really?
Everybody wants here.
Oh, here.
Hi, my name is Patty McKay. Can you hear me? One of the things that I think that we might be improving on is if we're talking about the sending areas, which are where you're actually taking the development rights from, to the receiving areas. One of the problems I have is that we want, normally smart growth would be sending them to the areas where there is the infrastructure in place, correct? So certainly Woodbridge, North Woodbridge would be one of those areas. However, what the board has before them right now and what the Planning Commission just passed shortly a month ago was the North Woodbridge Small Area Plan.
Right.
Where the density, it's a beautiful plan, very, very high density, up to 100 to 120 units per acre, looking to really revitalize North Woodbridge. So one of the worries that I have is, on the back end, we're talking about PDRs and TDRs, but already we're looking to approve the small area plan with very high density. So that would not necessarily be a place for a receiving area for PDRs and TDRs. I think we've got it backwards. We should be deciding our PDR-TDR program, looking at the areas where the revitalization should take place, where the high density should be taking place. Those should be receiving areas before we adopt these small area plans. We seem to be backwards on a lot of different things. Small area plan for, which is like a little sector plan for Route 29, is with most of the African American settlement of freed slaves. Well, now we have a settlement study that is getting started to make it possibly a historic area. That should come first.
Yes.
I feel like we need to send a message to our planning department that we need to perhaps be thinking a little more comprehensively instead of piecemeal.
That's inherently in
I
plan.
should note that in Stafford County, Stafford doesn't get it all right, for sure, but they started out with a plan to protect the Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve, which is a huge part of Stafford County, and so their transfer of development rights has all their receiving area along the 95 corridor, and everyone who has lots anywhere near Crow's Nest Natural Area Preserve is able to transfer those rights, and the development is going the right way. I will say that the pressure is growing for them to extend the receiving area because developers are pushing the county board that we've outdone ourselves along the 95 corridor, so please give us some more. Now that's a problem for down the road, but they did a pretty decent job of starting out from the get-go of saying, here's what we want to protect, let's get everything out of there. And now you have a secondary issue, which is the developers want to push for more, but at least they did it right in the first place in terms of this is where we want to protect, and it's going to be a huge success story in terms of a connected landscape that would never have been seen that way before the program.
I don't know if it's a comment or a question. I'm trying to struggle with this one. As we look at the development and the receiving areas that we're pushing towards the east side, what are the long-term impacts of that? Because as the population grows on the east side, the redistricting can happen. There can be more multiple districts created in the east side, whereas west side is basically all the property tax that come from the west side are basically enough, actually more than enough to basically support the properties and stuff like that. On the east side, the tax base is not that high. Would that potentially cause a higher tax rate all over the county? And would we have more districts on the east side that might have a higher power authority down the road? I'm just trying to look at the long term, what are the impacts of all this?
I'm happy to answer that. Kim should take a shot if she wants.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I think there is, some of that rings true. I mean, down the road, you can't create a different tax base and a different, structure there. I think you have to have a nimble view of the future to say you've got to do some things right now, and you probably are going to have the flexibility to look at it again in 10, 20, 30 years. Almost certainly you could get everything right. 15 or 20 years is not going to be right. And so you're not going to find this monolithic answer that fits for 50 years. You've got to probably build in a structure that demands relooking at it in 10-year windows and not, oh, it's optional, or, we'll decide that we like the way it is. You've got to build in that flexibility, because you almost certainly what you think is right now, even if you could get it, will not be right later.
Regarding conservation easements, something that I've been asked by a lot of communities, which are HOAs. You might have an HOA that has 20 lots, 10-acre lots, or an HOA that has 200 10-acre lots. Does the fact that it is an HOA prevent a single lot owner or a few lot owners from combining and wanting to conserve?
All right, I didn't know where you're going with that. The answer is yes. If you have an HOA and you have, some landowners that want to do the right thing and the others don't, we've got to work with you to try to convince those other landowners. There are some great, success stories where HOAs, can't stop infighting. No one wants to manage them. Allowing us to manage them or deeding them to us makes great sense, and in some cases, the tax benefits that come back to fund that HOA in that community bring a lot of really important value add. Sometimes can drop HOA fees for everybody in that community, but you do have to have all the landowners, rowing the boat in the same direction. and we can help come to HOA meetings and try to convince those that aren't convinced. And we do that often because there's a lot of HOA property worth conserving that probably over the long term would be better in our hands than in that HOA's, given that decisions can get made that are not going to protect the natural value.
But it would have to be all of the lot owners in the HOA,
Correct.
not just a few.
Correct.
As HOAs operate. Is there a last question? Then we're going to close off, and thank you for coming. I hope that everybody took notes. I know that Elena live streamed this.
Yes,
And is that still online?
we're still live streaming.
You're on right now.
You can share, we'll share it on the Prince William Conservation.
Okay, so that if you want to take another look, it will be on the Prince William Conservation Alliance Facebook page, which somebody else will do, not me. But thank you for coming, and I think that we explored a lot of issues.
I just wanted, before everybody leaves, I feel like we are on a precipice here for Prince William County, and I felt it the most strongly when you spoke about what Prince William County used to look like. And I think we have to make a decision about what we want to look like as a county, and how do we implement and incentivize programs to help people who would like to sell their property. How do we move forward and leave what I believe is a legacy unique to Prince William County? And maybe because I come here from Fairfax, when I said that the Rural Crescent is not just a land use tool and it brings this community together from the east, Jack, you're all the way from Woodbridge. We have Kim from Occoquan. We have Linda from Woodbridge and Occoquan. I mean, we have from Mid-County, Martin. I mean, what I'm saying is the Rural Crescent is important to all of us. And I think it's what sets Prince William County apart, and I think that it is worth preserving. And I believe that we have the tools to do it, and we've just never used them. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to our amazing guests. And also, I just want to say thank you to Kim. And without Prince William Conservation Alliance, we would not have this amazing panel. So a round of applause for Kim Hose and the Prince William Conservation Alliance.
Thank you.